Texas, 1937. The Great Depression had stolen much from America: jobs, hope, and dreams. But in a small town tucked into the piney woods of East Texas, something miraculous was happening. New London was booming. Beneath the soil lay a fortune: oil. And with it came prosperity unlike anything the town had ever seen. The once sleepy farming community now glittered with new automobiles, two-story homes, and modern conveniences unheard of in neighboring towns. People joked that New London had struck gold, liquid gold. And from that wealth came pride, the kind that makes a community believe it's untouchable. In the heart of this prosperity stood New London School, a sprawling, state-of-the-art campus built in 1932. It was the most expensive rural school in America at the time. Brick walls gleamed under the Texas sun, polished floors echoed with laughter, and classrooms buzzed with ambition. Children of oilmen, roughnecks, and dreamers studied side by side, unaware they were living inside a ticking clock. The building was a symbol, a testament to progress, hard work, and the promise of education. Local papers praised it as the crown jewel of East Texas. Inside, the hum of electric lights filled the air, the same hum that told parents their children were safe. No one questioned the choices made to build it quickly and cheaply. No one worried about the corners cut to stretch the district's booming budget just a little further. By 1937, the school housed more than 700 students and teachers. Every morning, the parking lot filled with buses, and children poured into classrooms holding books and lunch pails. Teachers prepared lessons, chalk squeaked on blackboards, and the oil money continued to flow. But beneath the surface, literally, something unseen was moving. A silent intruder had seeped into the foundations. New London School's original design had included a central heating system fueled by natural gas purchased from a local supplier. But when school officials realized they could save money by tapping into the nearby paraffin oil company's residue gas line, they made a fateful decision. It was an unofficial connection, meant to save a few dollars a month. The gas was odorless, colorless, and, to everyone's knowledge, completely harmless. For months, no one noticed anything unusual. The decision seemed clever, even practical. But under the school's floors ran a labyrinth of crawl spaces, perfect pockets where gas could collect, invisible and silent. Over time, the air became heavier beneath the classrooms. Students began to complain about headaches. Some teachers said they could feel a faint dizziness when the doors were shut. No one thought much of it. After all, it was spring. The air was thick, and Texas heat made anyone lightheaded. On March 18, 1937, a Thursday afternoon, the air was unseasonably warm. Students were preparing for a spring interscholastic meet, an event that had many of them staying late. The gym was alive with rehearsals, and in classrooms, teachers wrapped up the last lessons before dismissal. Down in the basement, a shop teacher named Lemmy Butler worked with a few students on a piece of electrical equipment. He didn't know that with every spark, every switch flipped, he was standing inches above a deadly reservoir. Outside, the wind was still. Inside, the air was sweet and ordinary. Parents ran errands, unaware that in a few minutes, their world would collapse. The New London School had become the pride of East Texas. And pride, sometimes, is the last thing a town feels before tragedy reminds it of humility. The bell was about to ring, and when it did, the sound would echo across the oil fields for miles, not as a chime, but as a roar. In every tragedy, there are warnings, faint murmurs that vanish into the noise of daily life. In New London, those whispers came as strange headaches, faint dizziness, and complaints of nausea that teachers brushed aside with a gentle, "Must be the weather." Some janitors mentioned that the basement seemed stuffier than usual, that tools rusted faster, that matches burned with a strange flicker down below. No one saw it as a danger. Not yet. The school board, proud of their gleaming institution, had bigger things to boast about than a few odd smells. After all, natural gas was common in oil country. Everyone lived near a well, and everyone knew it could be harnessed, controlled, and sold. It was part of life in East Texas, a symbol of progress, not peril. But progress has its shadows. Unbeknownst to anyone, a leak had been forming for days, perhaps weeks. The school's unofficial gas connection, tapped from a nearby pipeline, had begun to feed a steady stream of odorless, heavier-than-air gas into the crawl space beneath the school. Being denser than oxygen, it pooled low, creeping under classroom floors, rising slowly through cracks and seams, invisible and soundless. Children played above it. Teachers taught above it. No one could smell the death waiting below. At around 3 p.m., the school shop class was finishing up its final project of the day, an electric sander plugged into the wall, sparking faintly as the motor whirred. Students laughed as sawdust filled the air. It was a normal afternoon, the kind of ordinary moment people remember fondly, until the ordinary turns extraordinary in the worst way. Some students later said they'd felt a strange chill just before it happened, as if the room exhaled. Others recalled the faint hum of machinery, then a blinding light. But the truth is, in that single instant, no one had time to understand. At 3:17 p.m., one tiny electrical spark ignited the gas beneath the floor. The explosion that followed tore the school apart. The entire building, a massive two-story structure of steel and brick, lifted into the air as if it were made of paper. Witnesses miles away saw the roof rise and then collapse. The sound was deafening, like artillery fire rolling across the hills. A blast wave shattered windows across the town. Oil workers half a mile away dropped their tools, looking toward the schoolyard, now swallowed in a mushroom cloud of dust and smoke. Parents, hearing the blast, ran from stores and houses, sprinting toward the school. Some thought it was an oil well explosion, a common fear in East Texas. But when they reached the hill where New London School stood, they saw only ruin. The pride of the town was gone, reduced to twisted beams, shattered bricks, and a silence so heavy it pressed against the chest. The gymnasium roof had collapsed inward. The hallways, once filled with laughter, were now trenches of debris. Books, desks, and pieces of clothing were scattered across the field. And within minutes, the school grounds filled with screaming parents clawing through wreckage with bare hands. The blast was so powerful that a concrete bus parked outside had been blown into a nearby ditch. Children who'd been waiting to go home were thrown yards away. Some never stood up again. No one could make sense of it. The explosion seemed impossible, monstrous. What could destroy a brick building so completely? The only thing more terrifying than the destruction was the silence that followed it. In that silence came cries. Faint at first, the sound of small voices calling for help beneath mounds of rubble. It spurred the townspeople into action. Within minutes, oil field workers, still covered in grease and soot, abandoned their rigs and ran toward the wreckage. The same hands that once pulled wealth from the ground now dug through it for their children. The clock had stopped at 3:17. The sky had gone gray with dust, and beneath the splintered floorboards, the whispers had turned into screams. If stories like this move you, real tragedies that changed the world and taught us the cost of safety, subscribe and stay with us. Every story here uncovers the laws and lessons written in loss. What began as a faint hiss had ended in catastrophe. And as rescuers fought to uncover survivors, no one yet realized what had caused the blast, or that it was a tragedy born from thrift, from a decision that had saved pennies but cost everything. The truth would come later. For now, all that mattered was the sound of shovels and desperate prayers, and the bitter scent of smoke that filled the air where a school once stood. The dust hung thick over New London that afternoon, a strange brown haze that blotted out the sun. From a distance, it looked like a storm had hit the town. But as men and women drew closer, they realized this was no storm. It was the school, or what was left of it, hanging in the air like smoke after a battlefield shell. What seconds before had been a proud, sprawling structure was now a pile of rubble, reduced in less than a heartbeat. People ran from all directions, mothers still wearing aprons, fathers sprinting from oil derricks, faces streaked with grime and disbelief. Some thought it was an earthquake. Others thought an airplane had crashed. But when they reached the site, they saw children's shoes, textbooks, and twisted desks scattered across the red dirt. There was no time to think, only to dig. Oil workers, used to danger, rushed into the wreckage. They tore through broken beams with their bare hands, ignoring the shards and flames. Trucks from the oil fields arrived within minutes, their headlights cutting through the dust. They became makeshift ambulances, carrying the injured to nearby hospitals, and churches turned into triage centers. What rescuers found was beyond comprehension. Entire classrooms had been buried in an instant. Walls had folded inward, trapping dozens. Teachers were found shielding students, arms locked in final acts of protection. The blast had been so violent that bodies were thrown hundreds of feet, many landing in nearby fields. And yet, amid the devastation, there were miracles. A handful of students had been outside, running errands for teachers or heading to the bus. They were knocked down but survived. Some were found wandering the fields, dazed and covered in dust, clutching fragments of schoolbooks. One little girl was discovered sitting under a tree, rocking back and forth, murmuring her multiplication tables, the only thing she could remember. The scale of the destruction stunned even hardened rescuers. Within an hour, hundreds of volunteers swarmed the site. Oil companies sent floodlights and generators. Farmers brought shovels and wagons. Even prison inmates from nearby camps were released temporarily to dig through the ruins. They worked side by side, roughnecks, preachers, teachers, and convicts, united by one goal, to find the children. As night fell, the schoolyard turned into a scene of chaotic order. Torches flickered, lamps glowed, and the air buzzed with the low hum of diesel engines. People moved in silence except for the occasional cry, a name shouted into the dark, followed by a muffled sob when no answer came. By midnight, hundreds of bodies had been recovered. Some were recognizable, others were not. Parents lined up outside makeshift morgues, gymnasiums, churches, and stores cleared for the dead. They walked slowly past rows of small shapes under white sheets, praying not to find the one they loved. One father, an oil man, reportedly walked through 3 times before collapsing. "I thought I was prepared," he said later. But you never prepare to find your child by the shoes. The smell of smoke, chalk, and dust hung heavy in the air. It mingled with something else, something metallic and acrid that burned the throat. No one knew it then, but it was the residue gas, the same silent killer that had pooled beneath the floors. It lingered even after the fire was out, invisible and merciless. By dawn, rescuers had pulled nearly 300 bodies from the debris. Many were children. Some estimates would later put the toll even higher, closer to 300 students and teachers, making it one of the deadliest school disasters in history. New London had become a town of silence. No birds sang that morning. Only the rumble of trucks carrying away rubble, the low voices of ministers reciting prayers, and the muffled weeping of parents who had lost everything. And in the middle of it all, the clock on the school wall still read 3:17 p.m., frozen forever in time. The explosion was heard 40 miles away. Reporters, Red Cross workers, and government officials began arriving within hours. What they found was not just a disaster. It was a mystery. How could a modern, steel-and-brick school simply vanish? What could cause such destruction in an instant? Theories began to circulate. A bomb? A ruptured boiler? Sabotage? But as investigators examined the wreckage, their attention turned toward the basement, or what remained of it. The center of the blast was there. Somewhere in those twisted pipes and collapsed crawl spaces lay the answer. But the truth, when it came, would horrify them even more than the explosion itself. For it wasn't malice. It wasn't sabotage. It was a choice, a decision made in good faith to save a few dollars. A decision written on paper months before, now rewritten in the ashes of a town. And when investigators pieced it together, they realized this wasn't just an accident. It was a lesson, one the entire world would soon learn to smell. By the time the sun rose on March 19th, 1937, the schoolyard no longer looked like a school at all. It was a crater, a wound in the heart of New London. Smoke still curled from the rubble, mingling with the scent of oil and earth. Everywhere you looked, there were people digging, lifting, praying. Entire families stood side by side, holding onto each other for strength, searching for faces that would never appear again. The Red Cross set up tents. Doctors worked without rest. Women cooked for rescuers, trying to bring order to chaos. But even in the exhaustion, a question lingered. What could have caused this? That morning, a man in a dusty suit arrived at the scene, CM Dad Anderson, a state fire marshal investigator. He had seen explosions before, oil wells, gas lines, but nothing like this. The devastation was too complete, too instantaneous. There was no fire trail, no sign of sabotage. It was as if the building itself had detonated from within. Anderson walked through the ruins, notebook in hand. He studied the debris, marking the direction of twisted beams and the scatter of bricks. All pointed inward, toward the basement beneath the manual training room. That's where the force had originated. He crouched near what used to be a crawlspace vent and took a long breath. The air still held a faint chemical tang. Not smoke, not oil, something else, gas. Pieces of pipe jutted from the dirt. Some bent, some sheared clean. Anderson followed the line, tracing it back to where the school's heating system should have connected to the town's official gas supply. But instead, the pipe led somewhere else, to an unauthorized line connected to a residue gas pipeline belonging to the nearby paraffin oil company. He looked up, eyes narrowing. Someone had made their own connection. In the days that followed, investigators pieced the story together. Months earlier, the school board had decided to save money by cutting off its paid natural gas service. Instead, they'd hired a plumber to tap into a residue gas line, a byproduct of oil production that was otherwise burned off into the air. It was free, odorless, and seemingly harmless. The only problem? Residue gas often carried highly flammable hydrocarbons and no scent. No one could smell it leaking. For weeks, maybe months, the gas had been seeping through the pipe joints into the crawl spaces. Each day, a little more. The school's floors had become a thin barrier between life and catastrophe. And on March 18th, a single spark, likely from a shop class sander or a shorted wire, ignited the trapped fumes. The explosion that followed was so powerful that pieces of the school were found hundreds of feet away. The town had unknowingly built its pride upon a time bomb. When the truth spread, it cut deeper than any blast could. People wanted to blame someone, anyone. But who? The plumber who'd done as instructed? The board members who'd sought to save a few dollars? The oil company whose gas carried no warning smell? At first, grief turned to anger. Rumors of arrests and lawsuits flew. The press called it a crime of thrift. But in the end, no one was charged. The law at the time had no regulation requiring natural gas to carry an odor. No rule had been broken. It was legal and lethal. Funerals began the next day. Entire rows of coffins filled the New London Gymnasium, the one part of the school that had partially survived. Ministers stood before hundreds of grieving parents. The governor arrived, offering condolences. President Roosevelt sent messages of mourning. But for the people of New London, no words could fill the silence left behind. They buried their children beneath freshly turned soil while the wind carried the faint smell of gas across the fields, a cruel reminder of what they never knew to fear. And yet, out of that horror came a revelation. One investigator, Dr. W.C. Hines, a chemist who assisted in the aftermath, suggested something radical. If gas could be given a distinct odor, it could be detected before danger struck. The idea was simple. Add a warning smell so unmistakable that no one could ignore it. It wasn't a new concept, but it had never been adopted. Now, with nearly 300 children dead, the urgency was undeniable. Lawmakers took notice. Industry leaders met in emergency sessions. And in the weeks that followed, Texas would pass a law that would ripple across the world. A law that would make sure no one ever walked into an invisible death again. But before that law, before reform and reason, came grief, raw, endless, and unforgettable. In New London, the townspeople gathered around the crater where the school once stood. There were no speeches that day, no ceremony, only the sound of wind through twisted metal, and the soft murmur of a community asking the question that would haunt them forever. How could we not have known? In the weeks after the explosion, New London became a place suspended in mourning. Reporters came and went, government officials offered condolences, and donations poured in from across the country. But for the families, no sympathy could rebuild what was gone. Every face in town was missing someone. Every street was quieter. The schoolyard, once filled with laughter, was now fenced off, a scarred piece of land where grass refused to grow. But amid the sorrow, a truth had crystallized, one that demanded change. Investigators' final report was blunt, an accumulation of odorless residue gas, ignited by a single spark. It was a sentence that turned the world's attention to something most people had never thought twice about: the gas that fueled their homes. It heated water, cooked food, warmed classrooms, but it could not be smelled, seen, or sensed. That single fact had cost the lives of almost 300 children and teachers. In Austin, lawmakers began urgent discussions. Texas was still an oil state, built on gas and industry, but the explosion in New London had exposed a terrifying gap in regulation. The law hadn't required odorants, chemicals that give natural gas a recognizable smell, and now, every legislator knew the cost of that oversight. Within weeks, under mounting public pressure, the Texas legislature passed a new regulation requiring that odorants be added to all commercial and residential natural gas supplies. The chemical chosen was mercaptan, a sulfur-based compound with a powerful, rotten egg odor that no human could ignore. It was a simple change, but it would save countless lives. Soon, gas companies across America adopted the same standard. It spread globally, becoming one of the most quietly universal safety features in modern life. Every time someone smells gas today, every time they wrinkle their nose and rush to turn off a stove or leave a room, they are in some way remembering the children of New London. Because before 1937, gas didn't have a smell. And after 1937, it never went without one again. The phrase "laws written in blood" became more than a metaphor. It was a description of progress born from pain. The New London disaster reshaped how engineers, lawmakers, and industry leaders viewed safety. It taught them that the invisible dangers, the ones you can't see, can't touch, can't sense, are often the most lethal. Survivors of the explosion grew up carrying that lesson. Some became engineers, others teachers. A few even joined the gas industry, determined that no child should ever sit in a classroom above a silent killer again. The school was rebuilt, smaller, humbler, and with every safety feature imaginable. Yet for many, it was never truly the same. The sound of laughter never carried the same ease. The town's pride had been replaced with remembrance. For years, New London tried to heal. Memorials were placed, names were carved, stories were told and retold to ensure no one forgot. Parents aged with the memory of that day. Rescuers carried it in silence. And each spring, when the air grew warm and still, the town would pause, as if listening for echoes beneath the earth. Even now, decades later, the lesson remains as relevant as ever. Technology changes, safety evolves, but every rule we live by, every regulation protecting our homes, our schools, our cities, carries a story behind it. A story of failure, of loss, of realization. And somewhere, buried beneath those words, is always an aim. The explosion in New London wasn't caused by greed or cruelty, but by assumption, the belief that what can't be seen can't hurt you. That kind of faith is dangerous. It costs more than money. It costs lives. Today, when you strike a match and smell the faint sulfur of a gas leak, you're smelling the past, a warning shaped by tragedy, carried forward in every breath. It is the legacy of a town that learned too late, and a reminder for all who came after. Because safety is not born from comfort. It is forged in the ashes of catastrophe. The New London school explosion taught the world a truth too cruel for words, that progress without caution is a spark waiting to ignite. And so, in every hiss of gas, in every cautious sniff, In every quick turn of stove knob, the lesson whispers still. What we cannot smell can still kill. What we cannot see must still be respected. And every safety law has a story written in blood.